I'm Kurt Wagner.
And I'm Mike Epley.
We're old college debate teammates who disagree about pretty much everything as often as possible.
In each episode, we examine a question inspired by the week's events.
Despite our disagreements, we're friends. We respect each other, we keep each other honest, and we have fun doing it.
And most importantly, we drink.
Offering a fresh, informed snapshot of the debates that dominate contemporary discourse, this is Right Brain, Left Brain.
Welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain, the champagne of podcasts.
This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is brought to you by way of Gatorade Fierce Grape, which makes your poop turn green.
That's genius, actually. This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is also brought to you by way of Original New York Seltzer, naturally flavored vanilla cream soda. I discovered this at Safeway, and I can't stop drinking them. I've had like 25 today.
And by San Francisco, California's own Magnolia Brewing, California Kolsch.
I don't actually know where that beer came from. It was just in my fridge, and I'm going to drink it. Sorry, whoever's this is.
Well, big ups to Magnolia Brewing, who is like a place that I've had a warm association with over my many years living here in the Bay Area. Their Haight Street location was right by my first place I lived in when I moved here.
How about you sponsor us, Magnolia Brewing?
Yeah.
We'll drink all your Kolsch.
Yeah, give us some fucking old calamari. I'll eat it.
Also by way of Shochiku by Nigori Unfiltered Sake. Silky mild. It's hella good. Cold sake.
Awesome.
And then, of course, we got the Kraken.
Yes, of course.
And Mountain Dew. Goes without saying.
Good old Mountain Dew, Kraken Spice Rum.
Oh, yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. We want to thank you so much for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks, listeners.
For listening.
You're great. Yeah. Patreon subscribers as well. Thank you so much. Of course, every Patreon subscriber knows if you subscribe to Patreon, you get an entirely new episode of Right Brain, Left Brain every month that you're going to love because we put way more energy into that episode than we do into our regular free episodes.
Yeah, we actually try on the Patreon episodes, which makes them different. You've never experienced that before. And in fact, I'm frequently referencing people that I'm talking to that I know in my real life. I'm like, hey, listen to our last episode where we talked about our analysis of the wall. Like nobody else is getting at this, and me and Mike did. And they're like, I can't find it in the feed. I'm like, oh yeah, that was our Patreon episode. It's so good that we hid it behind the paywall. And now I'm trying to make this point about this great episode we made, but you have to pay on Patreon. So that's when I just hit my friends in the face and I take the $3 from their wallet. But then I subscribe them out of my own pocket on their phone while they're unconscious.
Right. So what's going on in the world? I have one. This week, Luke Perry died. Famous actor from 90210. But more famous in my heart from playing the role of Pike on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the film. He was a handsome guy. I'm sad he's gone. Furthermore, Paul Manafort was sentenced on Thursday. He thought he was going to get off for time served.
So Elon Musk is under review for his high-profile pot smoking incident on Joe Rogan's podcast. This is also in the wake of many vocal board members on the Tesla board calling for Musk's removal of CEO of Tesla Motors.
Wah, wah.
Yeah. As it turns out, being a high-profile millionaire who does drugs but then also leads a company, kind of a dualism. Not everyone's going to like that, especially board members.
Even in California.
Even in California.
We had LeBron James passing Michael Jordan's all-time record for NBA scoring. And I say, call me when LeBron's got 6 rings.
Yeah, I wouldn't take your phone off silent.
I do love LeBron James, though. He's amazing.
He's amazing, but I also like to hate on him.
Yeah, me too.
I like to celebrate and hate LeBron.
Yeah. Celebrate. Trademark. Donald Trump hosted a tech conference with high-profile CEOs, and he called the Apple CEO Tim Cook Tim Apple. And we cannot talk because of how frequently we misspeak on this podcast, but it's funny.
And it's also kind of understandable because Trump is obviously preoccupied with the ongoing testimony of Michael Cohen in Congress. And obviously, even when he's at press conferences like that, he's really thinking about what Cohen is saying about him down the street at the Capitol building.
Did I sign that check?
Hush money for porn stars. That is definitely a campaign violence violation. And then Cohen's like, man, I can't believe he fit all that into the memo field.
With that notoriously big handwriting, too. But speaking of Congress, that brings us to our topic for today. Ilhan Omar. or as Kurt likes to call it,
Ilhan, oh man, that's a lot of anti-Semitism.
or as I call it, Ilhan Omar, are you kidding me with this? So what's up with it? Well, Omar is a prominent freshman House representative who has been in hot water over some recent comments regarding Israel and a political lobbying group called the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC. Omar's in hot water over some tweets and comments that she made in the last month or so. When asked on Twitter who she thinks is paying American politicians to be pro-Israeli, Omar retweeted with a simple all-caps response, AIPAC.
Furthermore, she retweeted a Glenn Greenwald tweet in which he said GOP leader Kevin McCarthy threatens punishment for Omar and Tlaib over their criticisms of Israel. It's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation, even if it means attacking free speech rights of Americans, end quote. Her own comment reads, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," end quote. For those that don't know, that's a reference to P. Diddy and later P. Diddy Foo Fighters crossover hit.
Yeah, but I think because she says it's all about the Benjamins, baby, and she specifically says baby, and there's no baby in the Foo Fighters remix version, that it's probably a reference to the original It's All About the Benjamins, which is a cut and dry case of anti-Foo Fighterism. I hear that AFPAC, or the American Foo Fighters Political Action Committee, has asked Congress to remove her from the House Select Committee on Rap Rock.
And as somebody who knows about his music and specifically his mixtapes, I think that the adding of the baby is just about her putting her own mixtape version of her own anti-Semitic spin on the original hit.
It's all about the Benjamins, yeah.
Well, do you remember her other mixtape version? It's all about the destruction of the state of Israel and the death of all Jews.
But even before she ran for
a lot of people aren't up on that mixtape version, but it happened.
Sounds like some shit Kurt would bring into this. But even before she ran for office, Omar was no stranger to criticism of Israel. In a 2012 tweet, she said, quote, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Hashtag Gaza, hashtag Palestine, hashtag Israel."
Just in case you didn't know what region she was talking about when she said Israel. She since deleted the tweets and apologized, saying on Twitter, "Anti-Semitism is real, and I am grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole. We have to always be willing to step back and think through criticism, just as I expect people to hear me when others attack me for my identity. This is why I unequivocally apologize. At the same time, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, or the fossil fuel industry. It's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it."
But that's not the end of it, or even close. This controversy is bigger than just Ilhan Omar. Now, historically, the Democrats have been pretty oorah on giving Israel $4 billion or so a year in mostly military aid. But as more representatives of the less keen on Israel left of center gain positions of power, that is starting to change.
Bernie Sanders notably criticized Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli settlement policy during the 2016 presidential campaign, which was seen as something of a first on that large of a stage, and especially on a Democratic Party stage.
Right. And Obama had a famously strained relationship with Netanyahu throughout his tenure at the White House, though he was always carefully measured with his words. God, remember the days when the United States president was measured with his words?
Boring.
Furthermore, two House Democrats, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, both openly support the BDS, boycott, divest, sanction movement, which has been a particularly hot third rail in the Israeli-Palestine debate.
This is all culminated with a split within the Democratic Party over support for Israel. This is kind of like the part of the movie where Rufio uses Pan's sword to draw a line in the sand.
Oh, yeah, and Hook, like Ilhan Omar's pockets. He's like, "Oh, there you are, Peter." All the Democrats run across the other side.
So some Republicans and Democrats have jointly called for a resolution to denounce anti-Semitism and Ilhan Omar specifically in a not-so-subtle rebuke of her comments. But after days of back and forth regarding the wording of the resolution, the House ended up coming to a more generic rejection of hate, condemning hatred against African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other people of color, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, and others, and it no longer mentions Omar or anti-Semitism directly at all.
Well, it mentions anti-Semitism only in the same vein that it mentions all those other things.
Only as much as it has to.
And it passed in the House on Thursday afternoon with a 407 to 23 vote, which was pretty overwhelming. So how do people feel about it? Well, there are kind of two dividing lines on this issue. There's the obvious and constant Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal divide. But then there's also the divide among liberals about how to talk about and deal with declining constituent support for Israel, as well as major disagreement between interpretations of Omar's comments and intentions.
And in the Republican Party, there is a more low-key, but still interesting and parallel debate about U.S. interventionism versus non-interventionism and how much support do we give Israel or not. But that brings us to today's question. Are Ilhan Omar's remarks anti-Semitic? And if so, what should be done about it? On the right, we say, yeah, she's anti-Semitic and that she should be punished.
And on the left, we say, nah, she ain't anti-Semitic. We say this is conservative politicians trying to seize on a chance to virtue signal, which is something they love to criticize us for, and divide us on the left. And it ain't going to work.
It's funny how your virtue signal has no power to it once it's required to reflect back on you. But anyways, don't let me beat you up on that. Why don't you move on to your hypocritical argument?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to drink first.
All right. Well, I too will drink first.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. As always, I've got a few things that I would like to talk about. So the key question is Ilhan Omar an anti-Semite? I have not seen the evidence that she is. I've seen evidence that she's anti-Zionism, anti-Netanyahu, anti-occupation, anti-AIPAC, and anti-U.S. support for all of the above, but I have seen no evidence that she is anti-Semitic because none of those things are inherently anti-Semitic. I'd like to kind of start my argument by quoting Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Actually, Kurt, do you want to go ahead and take it away? You do it better, Bernie.
Anti-Semitism is a hateful and dangerous ideology which must be vigorously opposed in the United States and around the world. We must not, however, equate anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the right-wing Netanyahu government in Israel.
I might almost say that impression was anti-Semitic if Bernie Sanders was Jewish, but...
Well, you might want to perhaps do the impression in your own words so that in the editing booth you can listen to it and decide which one we can get away with.
It's clear that Omar is not going to be pledging her allegiance to Israel anytime soon. She tweeted in recent days, quote, "I am told every day that I am anti-American if I am not pro-Israel. I find that to be problematic, and I am not alone. I just happen to be willing to speak up on it and open myself to attacks," end quote. Omar has what many believe to be a reasonable opinion on the Israel-Palestine question, saying repeatedly that she supports Israel's right to exist and wants a peaceful two-state solution. Here's a tweet from last year. She says, quote, "I support a two-state solution. The Jewish people have a right to safety and Palestinians have a right to their homes. Conflict must be resolved through a lens of justice, and for this to happen, all voices must be brought to the table," end quote. I think what's really happening here is Republicans are capitalizing on her comments to drive a wedge into the left and try to weaken Democrats in the run-up to the 2020 election.
Never.
Remember that for most in Congress, job security is priority number uno. This is no different. Congressional Republicans and Fox News talking heads are rephrasing Omar's words to suit their interests. Furthermore, I personally, Mike, Left Brain Mike here, have the benefit of not trying to advance a political party because I'm not a Democrat, or protect a job as I'm not in Congress. So I get to say what's actually... Or so I get to say thanks, but I'll politely ask you to respect my time, sir. So here's the thing. Omar should do more work to frame her criticisms and choose her words in a way that removes all doubt that she is attacking U.S. support for Zionism, the occupation, and the settlements, and not attacking Jewish people. It is easy for her political opponents to refer to anti-Semitic tropes to paint her as guilty until proven innocent. And that is always going to happen when a House representative tweets shit like that. She's not the president. She does not get a pass.
Who's really accountable for what they do on Twitter anymore? all it requires is just another sediment layer of tweets to bury the old sediment layer.
Yeah,
even if your junk and photos of it going into things are under that old sediment layer. It's just like, it's like the old tweets of your dick pics are just going to be like oil in the future for future tweet miners.
Yeah, keep telling yourself that, Kurt.
Just like buried dinosaur bones.
Keep telling yourself that. Some archaeologist's going to come along and fuck up your day in a couple of years.
We found this ancient podcast host in this anthropological find putting his dick in the tailpipe of a car. We don't know what it means, but we think we can distill this old tweet down into oil.
But okay, so getting back to my argument, if we're going to invoke racism, that knife does cut both ways. Omar is not the first nor the most high-profile Democrat to criticize AIPAC or the U.S. government's blank check to Israel, yet she is the target of all this mayhem. Why is that? Is there a chance it's related to her hijab? While researching for this episode, I noted a Washington Post reporter started her report on this topic with this quote, Representative Ilhan Omar was elected in 2018 as one of the first 2 Muslim women ever elected to Congress. And as a Somali refugee, she has been critical of Israel and U.S.-Israeli policy. Are you fucking serious? When did Ilhan Omar indicate that being Muslim or Somali play any part whatsoever in her position on Israel or lobbyist money? Like, what's that got to do with it? Maybe we are all constantly making assumptions about Omar that nobody seems to notice and no one is able to mention.
Maybe we're just talking about all the things she says over time, but I'll leave that back to you.
Well, yeah.
Also, double-edged racism knife.
It is double-edged. Now, I would talk about all the racism and credible threats that have been directed at Ilhan Omar from the right, but that would be what about ism, which is a fallacy that happens a lot in political debate. Like, oh, you say we're bad, well, you're bad too. You know what I mean? It's like, well...
And it doesn't taste anywhere near as good as what a burgerism. And that's only available in the Southwest.
Yeah. Now, whether millions of Americans are racist against Omar, they are, has no bearing on the question of whether she is an anti-Semite, so I'll leave it at that. Finally, though, I do got to point out the painful hypocrisy of Republicans. And I'll keep this list fairly short for brevity's sake. Number 1, rejecting symbolic bills that, quote, don't do anything, literally hours ago, as Republicans use it as an excuse to oppose the Green New Deal. Rejecting symbolic bills that, quote, don't do anything, as they have historically avoided bills that denounce other forms of discrimination. By the way, this House bill that was passed today doesn't do anything. There are more examples of House representatives acting badly, but I know that there are, of course, also examples of House Democrats and those on the left acting badly as well. And that would be a race to the bottom if Kurt and I decided to be like, whoa, blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I will mention Donald Trump for a second, because there is Donald Trump calling entire countries shitholes and calling undocumented Mexican immigrants rapists and murderers.
And some of them are nice people.
Wow. So where is the rebuke of Donald Trump from House Republicans or Senate Republicans? Thanks to Nancy Pelosi, we got the rebuke of Donald Trump on Thursday, as the Democrats managed to somehow turn an Omar-induced indictment of anti-Semitism into a far-reaching indictment of hate speech in general that arguably, in my opinion, applies much more to Donald Trump than it does to Ilhan Omar. Nice one, Nance. And by the way, Ilhan Omar voted yes on and released a press statement celebrating this bill from today.
No shit, she's in favor of the bill that lets her off the hook.
While all 23 no votes came from, you guessed it,
Republicans who were mad that they defanged the original meaning of the bill to oppose Omar's anti-Semitism. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping into my speech.
Republicans. So what do you say we drink?
No, I've developed a hatred of fun in between speeches once again. The good thing for you is that I got a pretty big turd brewing.
Okay.
Down this backdoor chute. So unlike you, I'll be quick.
I could have guessed about the turd anyway.
Well, I mean, how often do you have to guess? I shit like 25 times in a day. You only have to guess that Kurt will defecate in this hour and you're always right. If you could trade commodities based on my defecation, everybody would get rich.
It's the wellspring of capital.
I think that there's like an extra dimensional portal that, like, you know, all those skinny people who can eat whatever they want and then like nothing happens to them. Mm-hmm. I think that the portal deposits their food into my stomach and I get fatter and I shit way more many times a day than I'm actually eating. Because I only eat 3 times a day, but I'm shitting like 25 times a fucking day.
Maybe it's all that shit news you're ingesting.
Maybe it's just a response to all the shit that Democrats are piling on my plate.
You're going to need 9 stomachs like a cow for all that.
Oh, man. So listen, Omar's anti-Semitic. Omar's troubles escalated to national prominence when she became critical of the United States' support for Israel after she had all these past high-profile associations with anti-Semitics and supports for people accused of anti-Semitism. I'm not going to go too much into that because I want to keep it at the topic at hand. The issues with Omar and her closest colleagues lobbying for anti-Semites while arguing that lobbying for Israel is improper. The AIPAC tweet, the implication that support for Israel is all about the Benjamins, quote unquote, perpetuates the stereotype that wealthy Jews control people's votes with money. Her insinuation that hypnotism furthers this echoes the troubling language in centuries-old anti-Semitic blood libel tropes. Contrast this with the idea that supporters of Israel are organized by the belief that Israel must be defended from anti-Semites intent on destroying it. Omar would never say that her support for Palestinians is, quote unquote, all about the Benjamins, right? Nor would she say that her acceptance of Palestinian cause donor money or in-kind donations from pro-Palestinian organizations like that she's received are motivated by money. She would say that we're working together and spending our money on things that we believe in because this is our political organization. And this is where the double standard begins. And this is where it starts to get anti-Semitic and racist. In fact, the defanged version of the resolution was almost presented to Congress on Wednesday, a day earlier anyway, but it was delayed after a conference organized by Omar, Tlaib, and noted anti-Semitic groups like CARE, C-A-R, the Council for American Islamic Relations, unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land money funneling operation to Hamas, an anti-Semitic organization. Groups like the JVP, like a leftist group that endorses anti-Semitic terrorism and promoted and hosted and gave legal defense to Rashmea Odeh, a bomber who murdered 21-year-old and 22-year-old Jewish students and wounded 9 other Jews in a Jewish market attack. CARE also gave some legal and financial support to Odeh. And my point is that, like, over and over again, anti-Semites who've literally murdered Jewish people find themselves in league with Omar, holding press conferences with her. Omar is on the record when other people are embattled for this, like supporting them. In case after case after case, we have this double standard where Omar believes that if you support Israel, you must be motivated by money. And she's on the record saying that. But if you murder Jews, then you're a good guy, according to Omar. This is where the double standard comes in, and this is where the anti-Semitism accusations come in, right? Ousting Ilhan from like committees and dropping Democratic Party support for her would just generally be consistent with past rejection of anti-Semitism and racism in American politics. Steve King, who we've mentioned earlier, he was kicked off his committees and primaried by Republicans once he outed himself as a racist, and the corollary is pretty clear here. If you want like a historical example, Trent Lott was forced out in the early 2000s when he just implied that, pro-segregationist Democrat turned Republican Strom Thurmond would have made a better president. Like, when we catch Republicans in clear examples of racism, our own party has no quarter for these people. And so I won't take the debate too much further off course by like citing, more examples of Republicans and when they do the right thing and force out racists when we find them. But all anyone on the right is asking for is the same consistency from our friends across the aisle. But instead we get rallies around racists like Ilhan Omar, Linda Sarsour, Governor Northam of Virginia, and Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring. The media and the left tried to hold Trump and Republicans accountable for attracting both imagined and sometimes real endorsements from anti-Semites like David Duke and Louis Farrakhan. And on Twitter this morning, Duke endorsed Ilhan Omar in her resistance to Zionism, calling her the most important member of Congress, and then writing a whole long article about how great Ilhan Omar is. And then what was the funniest thing about this tweet is that he had a picture of Omar looking particularly beautiful because she's a beautiful woman, but then it had a picture of like did you see this, Mike?
No.
The tweet is hilarious because right next to the picture of Omar, he added like an emoji of like the smiley
Jesus.
face that has the hard eyes over it.
Oh, David Duke. What do you come up with next, buddy?
I mean, honestly, I feel like there's no consistent reason why Twitter has banned Richard Spencer but kept David Duke. And I think that the only reason why they've kept him around is that David Duke is way more entertaining than Richard Spencer.
Guess I'm going to have to follow him.
So in addition to calling to Omar the most important member of Congress, like, the left is just not being consistent in demanding an endorsement from Duke be treated like a scarlet letter when a Democrat has to wear it, the way that in the past, like, famously when Duke had supported Republicans, especially Donald Trump, they were like, oh, and then when Trump didn't disavow fast enough, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, he's a racist because he didn't like cut off the reporter to say, I disavow, right?
I disavow.
Right.
What if Omar said, I disavow?
Omar hasn't even said I disavow. And that's the point. Like other prominent anti-Semites have rushed to support Ilhan Omar, like say Louis Farrakhan, who famously called Jews termites. He also late on Thursday issued support for her. And in fact, this morning, the number 3 Democratic House member, James Clyburn, said that Omar shouldn't be criticized because her experiences as a refugee are, quote unquote, more personal than Holocaust survivors in this analysis. Whatever the fuck that means. And so this is definitely a point where Democrats are doing at least a little bit of moral equivocation and not holding people to the same standards when it comes to anti-Semitic standards, definitions, and endorsements, and who should own that.
Man, I'll tell you what do they say? Every asshole's got an opinion.
And
right?
They all taste different.
They all taste different. Well, that was something. Let's have a drink.
No, again, I've developed a hatred for fun.
Cheers. All right, I got a couple things to say. Number one, there's this comparison to Republican Steve King. So that is a way off-base comparison with what Ilhan Omar herself has actually done. And actually, as a preamble to this, I want to point out a clear fallacy that Kurt's making in his argument. He's taking the actions and statements of people that he asserts are allies of Omar's or supporters of Omar, and then putting the responsibility of their words and actions on Omar herself. Kurt is conflating what Ilhan has said and done with what people who he associates with Ilhan to have said and done. And I do think associations matter, but I think that they're not the same as when Omar herself says what she says, which it was laid out, and we've quoted exactly the worst things that she's ever said. Contrast that with the worst thing that Steve King has said when he says, quote, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? I'm going to say Omar has never said anything nearly that bad ever, anywhere. And by the way, Republicans did not peace out Steve King when he said that shit. Instead, they defended him for as long as they could until they couldn't defend him anymore, at which point they took him off of committees. He is still serving in Congress to this day.
But he's not going to win.
Yeah, he'll probably be out. Yeah, he's not going to.
Like the whole party's withdrawn their support. He's been preemptively primaried. Like,
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. They're gonna piece him out, I'm sure. But furthermore, Steve King, the active Congress member, did abstain from this bill while Ilhan Omar voted for it and released a statement celebrating it. So there's that. Now, speaking of double standards, as Kurt brings up, when it comes to dog whistling, I have kind of an open question. Which one of us can have it both ways? Either both of us can have it both ways or neither of us can have it both ways. So Omar or Trump, which one are we going to side with when it comes to dog whistling? When David Duke jumps on both bandwagons, how much weight are we giving this? And this has been a moment of reflection for me, right? I'm not pro Duke or pro Farrakhan, obviously. And I've done my fair share of being like, what the fuck, Donald Trump? David Duke is talking about how you're great for the Klan. Shouldn't you be doing something? Shouldn't you be saying something, right? To me, that's where the distinction comes in. Ilhan Omar gives what I think to be like a reasonable apology and reasonable backtracking, you know, something like deleting tweets, right? Like she's trying, I think, to be like, yeah, okay, I said some shit that David Duke's on board with. Maybe it's time to back up a little bit. Whereas the best that we got from Donald Trump when it comes to David Duke is, okay, I disavow. Are you happy?
I would argue that means more rejection of Duke. So yeah, as far as the double standard thing, I think that this goes to, I don't want to jump too far ahead to common ground, but this just goes to where I think that it shows that both sides have problematic behavior rather than it being people getting up on a high horse and being like, I'm with the only party that ever was never racist. You know what I mean?
Right.
But again, I don't want to jump too far into common ground, like where I have bones to pick with you about that or a breakdown on that. I think that we start to come together, and I want to talk about where we disagree before we move on to where we do agree. So really, I think one of the biggest things I want to bring up is your point about King. Like, even if you're right that Omar's not as bad as King, they're still heading in the same direction. And at best, Omar has like reached or is near her like King moment, because, you know, like a lot of people on the right and left have written recently, and I'm persuaded by this argument, King had all these moments leading up to, You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, one of these days, he breaks up. Actually, as it turns out, I'm in favor of white nationalism. And then all of a sudden, the writer,
literally white supremacy.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, the writer fuck.
You got to give me something to work with, Steve.
Yeah. When someone is arguing that Jewish money, rather than like belief in the state of Israel, triggers their support of Israel. And then that double standard that if you support Palestine, it's not about the money, right? While that person takes money from Palestinians and supports anti-Semitic terror organizations, or at least is willing to sit down with them and break bread, it's choosing the destruction of Israel and a politics that has no accommodation for a two-state solution over one that allows for peace. Even if you have this candidate on the record in the past saying, I support a two-state solution, at the point at which you're comfortable, betting up with people who've committed anti-Semitic acts of terrorism, and then all of a sudden you say that, oh, but if you support Israel, it's about the money, you're still way too close for comfort.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the betting up with people that support terrorism or that are terrorist part, but I will kind of give you a little bit of an olive branch on this one to say, it's kind of unclear to what extent Omar supports Israel, right? She's more or less implying at least that she doesn't explicitly support Israel for whatever that means. She has said numerous times that she supports a two-state solution, but I don't know if that means that she would want to cut all funding for Israel. She's obviously off base with the reasoning for U.S. politicians supporting Israel monetarily or morally or however you want to frame it. In my opinion, it's because we want a big-ass military base in the middle of the fucking Middle East. But that's neither here nor there for... I don't know. To what I guess it would be helpful to know to what extent she does support Israel.
It's kind of like how the North Koreans keep saying that they support denuclearization as long as they can keep nuclear weapons.
She's like, I support Israel as long as we don't have to support Israel.
Right. And I think that, I don't want to pick too much of a bone about the Green New Deal. I think the Green New Deal is not meant to be symbolic. I just think it's incomplete, and that it's supposed to be an allegory to the actual New Deal. And so if Democrats wanted to be honest about the Green New Deal and say, this is the Green New Deal concept, but they're saying we need a Green New Deal without being really specific, right? Because when the New Deal itself was unveiled under FDR, there was no, this is the idea behind the New Deal. And then later we'll push policy. It was specific all up at front at once. The New Deal means this policy, this policy, this policy, and it was a bill, and then they voted on it.
Now, wait a minute here. You're saying this as a response to me giving Republicans shit for saying that they don't support bills that don't do anything.
I'm just saying. Right? I'm just saying. You holding up the Green New Deal as only symbolic, as a way to dodge the fact that it's not complete.
I don't actually believe that you're right, but even if you're 100% right, and the Green New Deal is not a good example of a symbolic bill, it doesn't refute my point that Republicans are hypocrites for saying that they oppose only symbolic bills that don't do anything.
Oh my God, everybody. Look, I don't want to jump too far ahead to common ground, but I agree with you there. Both sides have had their own plenty of chances to hypocritically either endorse or reject symbolic bills.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
I mean, Congress is kind of like a symbolic masturbation organization more than it even is like a legal organization.
Right brain, left brain occasionally dips its left pinky toe into the real world.
And it's right. But I don't know. I mean, I think that we've sort of talked about our differences. We've left a lot of it for the viewers to decide. Maybe we're ready to move on to what we agree with and what a lot of people are ignoring on the left and right on this.
Again, if it's a reason that I can have a drink, I'm with it.
All right. Well, let's pour out the shots this time.
Cheers to resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is somewhat related to this debate.
To peace in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah. To Semitism.
Honestly, if you want to celebrate Semitism, the irony behind that is that you celebrate the fact that Jewish and Arab peoples are descended from the same common ancestor. Like every ethnic conflict that drives people to kill each other, it's fucking insane. It ignores our commonality. Just like the fact that who killed each other more than Jews, Christians, and Muslims when all of us are yeah, so we all agree it's the same God.
The only thing we can agree on is that we all worship the same deity.
And we have to all kill each other.
But we disagree on who the deity prefers. The only way we can figure out who the deity prefers is if there's only one man standing.
Brilliant Abrahamic religions. Way to knock that one out of the park.
Careful, you're venturing into anti-Semitic tropes.
So, okay, one of the points I wanted to mention on Common Ground, first of all, is that Senate Republicans also had a bill that specifically, and like one of the big issues of contention here is that the Democrats took a bill that they had proposed that targeted Omar for anti-Semitism, and then they watered it down into a bill that didn't target Omar, and then it didn't, depending on which version, barely mentioned, or it didn't target anti-Semitism at all. But Republicans had their own chance quite a while ago, before the Democrats took any action, to vote on an anti-Semitism resolution for Omar.
In the Senate,
where
the Republicans control.
In places where Republicans had control. And then they started to, and it just wasn't worth the trouble. It just goes to show you that at the very least, Republicans have had their own lack of will issues with actually fully like bringing her to term.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make that an abortion reference, but
maybe we save it. Maybe we can agree that sometimes politics is more important in Congress than morals.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I'm not going to actually stick up for the morality of Congress, because every thinking person knows that is the greatest hotbed of scum and villainy since Mos Eisley. Look, at least some of the things that Omar has been accused of for anti-Semitism aren't really anti-Semitic or evidence of anti-Semitism like at all. A lot of people on the right have made a lot of hay about times when people like either King before he outed himself or other people who've never been implicated fairly in anti-Semitism being like unfairly accused. And the truth is that anti-Semitism, just like all kinds of ism, is a weapon that the right and left both use against each other, especially if it's momentarily proximate based off of politics of that last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Here.
Yeah.
Yes, I will fucking drink to that.
Yeah. That's why I think that like what we have here is like a lot of wolves hiding in plain sight, trying to tell you like, oh, I'm the sheep. Look at this evil wolf, on the other side of the aisle, when it's like in Congress, they're all fucking wolves, but lazy wolves. And here's another thing. I really do believe that it's not un-American or anti-Semitic to oppose American support of Israel or to be critical of Israeli policy. Like, I think that the objection comes on the right from people who want to push Palestine up every iota that Israel is pushed down a notch. But I certainly agree that, especially when Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, Palestinians and Israelis, Muslims and Jews and Christians can sit down and really talk about this thing, the dialogue is way more fair and way more accurate than like the media context that gets us all fucking hooped and hollered over it.
All right, well, I got a couple of common ground points as well. So first, even though I don't personally believe that Ilhan Omar is anti-Semitic in her heart, I do understand if people read her words through the context of old anti-Semitic tropes that are very well established and described at this point. David Duke and Louis Farrakhan have both supported her comments, and that's not a good look because they're both extremely anti-Semitic people. So if Left Brain Mike on Right Brain Left Brain says something, and then David Duke and Louis Farrakhan independently are like, fuck yeah, Left Brain Mike, you fucking tell him. That's going to give me cause for concern. I'm going to stop and say, fuck, what have I done?
It's also worth noting that both Duke and Farrakhan endorsed Donald Trump because they thought that he would be free of Jewish money. And it's something that we haven't mentioned so far in this episode. It is a troubling unifying thing between white and black nationalists. Like every white nationalist hates black nationalists and every black nationalist hates white nationalists. But they're like, let's come together on hating the Jews.
Locked arms. And conversely, if some honest, reasonable person thinks that Omar's language was unacceptable because it invokes anti-Semitic tropes, I simply am going to respect that. I do think that it's good that Omar has been like, oh, probably not going to do that. Yeah, fucked up. Sorry. And she could go further to apologize and she could do more. Obviously, she can take actions to show that her actual game is pro-Jewish, right? And so I don't know, what can we really agree on? Like any sane, morally centered person is really praying for the day when Israel and Palestine live peacefully.
Once that exists, then there won't be any need in American politics for us to divide each other based on this.
And to the empty, dark void, I say, Amen.
Well, shit, that sounds like an episode to me.
It does. Thanks for listening. Share, comment, like us on social media. Of course, you can find us on social media. I'm Left Brain Mike on everything except Twitter, where I'm Mike Left Brain.
I'm Right Brain Kurt on everything: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pornhub, where you can find pictures of just my taint, not the asshole or the balls, but just
Close-ups of the taint.
just the space between the two.
The little peach fuzz hairs.
Yeah, I've dyed them colors.
Oh, the show has accounts too. RBLB Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pornhub, etc.
Yes.
The Pornhub joke is getting old. We're going to have to actually get on Pornhub if we're going to keep making this joke. It's just more work for us.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll get high.
Nobody's listening or watching now, so I don't even know why we talk about it.
So until next week.
As it turns out, dyeing your taint hairs is actually very painful, and I don't recommend it.
So don't dye your taint hair. Also, whatever you do, if it's after 3 a.m. and you've recently smoked weed, do not, I repeat, do not go to ebay.com or amazon.com.
Don't go to happy hour right before you have to record a podcast, because it's going to make things harder.
Until next week, I'm Left Brain Mike.
And I'm Right Brain Kurt.
Adios.
Right Brain, Left Brain is a production of Mike Apley and Kurt Wagner. We are the vocal talent. The show is produced by Nick Bernardi. Graphics are by Bianca Crompton. And the RBLB theme is written by Dysonor.
Dysonor. Find them on Spotify.
Until next week.
Adios.
Cheers.